Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I keep looking at the calendar and thinking spring football is not really going to start in like 2 weeks, right? But Tony, spring football is going to start in just a little over 2 weeks. I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of stuff to find out, to figure out, to talk about. And of course, that's why we are working on our positional previews, because we have to get them in a hurry because the camp is fast approaching. So, um, before we do that first, Tom, you and I have not had a chance to talk about James Laurinaitis getting the linebacker coaching job, something that for a while, for the better part of the last month, didn't look like was necessarily going to happen, or else it already would have happened. Once there was room for him to be added and he wasn't, it became a situation like we had talked about Jason Taylor and was the assistant defensive line coach, the move that they were going to make, and is James Laurinaitis okay being a graduate assistant? And since he hadn't left and since he hadn't been named, it seemed like everything was copacetic. And then uh, I start to be told stuff like he's looking elsewhere, and then all heck kind of breaks loose, and it looks like he's gone. And then the next day he's back, and he is now Ohio State's linebackers coach. Quite an adventure. Tom, I just wonder who is going to be the scapegoat of the coaches now that the entire coaching staff is set. And is it Justin Fry? I'll give you the field. I'll take Justin Fry.
Yeah, I might like your bet there because I feel like generally it's how there's like the delay for a year, like a team wins the World Series and there's the big ticket, the big thing of tickets comes the next year. The attendance increase comes the year after because everyone's kind of worked themselves up and then they're looking forward to buying tickets the next year. It's kind of the same thing. Tony, Ohio State fans watched the Cotton Bowl and they were very mad about the offensive line of the Cotton Bowl. So they're like the engine's already warmed up. They don't need to go start the car, do the row out starter. The engine has been running on the anger at Justin Fry for a while now. I think the offensive line is going to be fine this year. I think it's going to be better than it was last year. I think the addition of Seth McLaughlin is a pretty big one. They added another big piece after the spring last year. We'll see if they choose to do that again this year. But there's certainly, Luke Montgomery and Josh Fryer and Tegra Shabola. You got some interesting pieces there to move around. So I think there's a way, Tony, and this is going to be one of the most reckless things ever said on this podcast. I think there's a way things go well enough this year that there isn't a scapegoat, a whipping boy on the coaching staff. I guess Justin Fry is probably the favorite, but none of the above might be second, with the field being third. It feels like it could be, if they're as good as they could be, it could be a somewhat peaceful fall in Columbus, stay out of the game threads.
You are so stupid. You are so innocent and dumb.
That's
I
me,
do.
the eternal optimist.
We'll figure out who the special teams coordinator is, who gets that assigned to them, and maybe they will have some of that as well. And that was one of the things when James Laurinaitis, it was when we announced it, or it was announced, he had a bunch of people replying like, well, who's going to be the special teams coordinator? Meanwhile, for like the last 3 years, it's like, why do we need a special teams coordinator? And now that all 10 assistants are set, you're like, well, who's going to be who's going to fly this ship? Is there a pilot on this plane that can fly special teams? And it's like, you just spent the last 3 years telling me how nobody needed to be a special teams coordinator. You didn't need to be a soul. But there are plenty of guys that can do it. Matt Guerrieri has had experience with it. I've been saying just give it to the tight ends coach because that's what a lot of people do. Ryan Day will be involved, so they'll get it figured out. But there's your the coaching staff is set. Some new contracts were issued. I put in a FOIA request, so hopefully we'll have contract details early next week on that. And I'm expecting, Tom, $2 million for Chip Kelly. Do you think?
That's probably Jim Knowles just got an extension too, and he came in at 1.9 million. So you got to assume, based on the recent results, he's probably north of 2 now. I would guess Chip Kelly, coming from a literal seated Big Ten head coach position. You got to figure he's probably north of $2 million as well. It's wild that. How long ago was it that Gene Smith said, "No, I'm not going to have $1 million head coach"? It was less than a decade, right? Less that they were not going to have $1 million assistant, and here we are north of $2 million. John Cooper, when John Cooper got fired, do you know what John Cooper was making as the head football coach at Ohio State?
No, it was at one point he was
Six
making like $100,000.
No,
But
$600,000 was what he was making at the end of his tenure. That was a year that started with a 2. This is not, oh, what did Earl Bruce make? No. John Cooper, coaching in the year of our Lord 2000, made $600,000 a year as the head football coach at Ohio State. The special teams coordinator last year made $100,000 less than that. That is, well, inflation comes for us all, Tony, and college sports, the money has to go somewhere if it can't go to the players. This just in, the money might be going to the players pretty soon, but well, for now, coaching salaries continue to grow.
2014, Gene Smith talking about $1 million assistant coaches. We're not there yet. I don't think our league has jumped there yet. A lot of people made the assumption that Michigan did that. They did not. One day it'll probably happen. I don't know when. We watch the market based on talent and performance. I project that at some point it'll happen to us because of who we are, but I don't know when that'll happen. And then the next question was, you wouldn't preclude that possibility of a $1 million coordinator here? Never say never, not where we are. So, 10 years ago.
Where we are is Columbus, Ohio, where people are a little bit crazy about college football. So that's remember 2014, the quaint days of college football where players were tethered to their school and had to sit out a year to transfer, and it was illegal to trade your gear for tattoos, and none of the assistants made 7 figures. And Tony, do you know how much do you know how much popcorn cost at Ohio Stadium back then? I'll tell you, it was a hay penny. That's how much it cost at Ohio Stadium, a popcorn back in 2014. Oh boy, Tony, the times they are changing.
Do you know what Urban Meyer was making what his first contract was? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I'm going to say $4.5 million, something like that.
It was $4 million. It was 6 years for $24 million. And now at some point it'll be 2 years, $24 million. That's for whoever the next top head coach bump is. It's probably going to be around $12 million. So a great time to be a head coach. Probably time if you, you know how we always talk about get your kid to become like a left-handed reliever or get him into golf, get him into coaching. Just make sure that they marry somebody that can get them through the graduate assistant portion of it and like the first 18 years of it. But those 19th through 27th year, it's going to be set. Generational wealth. And you don't even have to be good. You could just be lucky.
You're going to be reading your kid Goodnight Moon and what's the one about the bunny? The bunny who loves you to the moon and back. All those books, and then also, son, let me tell you about buyouts. This is very important. Listen to me. The Goodnight Moon, that's fine. Harold and the Purple Crayon, that's fine. We got to talk about buyouts. This is a very, very. You're going to thank me later. Just trust me.
Yeah, and son, I'm going to read from you the winner's manual. Tonight's the winner's manual. Just going to read stuff. Gems from Jim Tressel. But anyway. So we're doing our positional previews for the spring. It is now time for the pass catchers and also since we're talking about tight ends, the run blockers and pass blockers. But also some of these receivers are run blockers. Tom, as I write down, I just, jot down all of the receivers, all of the scholarship receivers that are going to be in for the spring just because I don't want to forget anybody. And it sure looks like I forgot somebody because there are only 8 guys there. And you can't even have a 3 deep. When we're talking about 3 receivers, you got Emeka Ibuka, Jaden Ballard, Kojo Antwi, Keon Grays, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, Bryson Rogers, and Jeremiah Smith. And Mylan Graham will be in this summer. That's not a lot of guys. And you lose Marv, you lose Julian Fleming, you lose Noah Rogers. this is a thin group, very, very talented, but Tom, there's not a lot of depth here.
There's not a lot of depth there, but how often does Ohio State get past its sixth receiver? When was the last time Ohio State's sixth receiver had more than 8 to 10 catches? It feels like that hasn't really happened under Brian Hartline. He's sort of gotten away from that six receiver rotation that they ran a while in kind of the mid 2010s. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of names, it's a little thin. The talent, especially the top level talent, is certainly there. There's some very, very impressive players on this team. And I think it's a little bit less of a crisis than when you're really thin at offensive line. Because when you're really thin at offensive line, the true freshman coming in, this is going to be 2 to 3 years before this guy even has a chance to contribute. At wide receiver, Jeremiah Smith, I mean, there was someone, I think, on our board who had an over-under of receptions for Jeremiah Smith and set it in the low 40s. Like the over-under was, would he break the freshman receiving record? And I'm going to take the under on that. But, Jeremiah Smith contributing and getting 20, 25, maybe 30 receptions this year. Sure, you could see that. And Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes, those are second-year guys who are, who have sort of flashed already, and you saw them earning a little more playing time during the course of the year. And Emeka Egbuka, obviously, a pretty significant contributor coming back. So the talent is there where even if there's an injury, you're still okay. And I haven't even talked about half of the receivers there. So I don't think this is a concern by any means, but it's a little thinner than it typically is.
It's definitely good to get Bryson Rogers back out of the portal to help there, especially having him on campus again still, and because they need bodies in the spring. Although you wonder if that lack of bodies will help Jeremiah Smith get into things quicker and better. And if you want to put I would probably put an over-under on him just because people are so enamored. I wouldn't feel comfortable going above 29.5. And we just have that 30 number for freshman receivers. Only 3 have done it in Ohio State football history. So let's see if he would be one of those. And we'll talk about that later on down the road. But I am interested to see what the first trio of receivers will be when they run out there in that first practice. And they'll probably do some 7-on-7 before 11-on-11. They may do 11-on-11 before 7-on-7, but it's all very walk-through type. It's, there's going to be no pads, obviously, any of those first couple of practices. But as my initial thought in terms of who would be the first 3 receivers out there is that it's Emeka, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Innes. But the more I started thinking about it, I won't be shocked if it's Emeka still in the slot and it's Jaden Ballard and Carnell Tate. Jaden Ballard, now a 4th-year guy. I think the way they moved Marvin around into the slot last year a bunch makes me think that we'll see Emeka there as well. So that is my, I guess at this point. And I'm kind of surprised that I'm making that guess in terms of having Ballard out there with that first trio.
Well, I was all ready to say Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, and Brandon Innes, and have you be just shocked that I would have 2 second-year players out there ahead of Jaden Ballard. I guess that would be less of a shock than I expected. I was trying to remember towards the end of last season, like Cotton Bowl, what was the receiver rotation in the Cotton Bowl? Because, normally you would just be able to kind of go, oh, well, who did they throw passes to? Like, well, that was a little bit of a complicated question in the Cotton Bowl. So I remember Ballard had one that got kind of knocked away from him right before the half, but I don't remember him having any other plays. I know Innes was out there in the first half. To me, I think if Brandon Innes is out there in the first half of the Cotton Bowl and Carnell Tate's out there in the first half of the Cotton Bowl playing a bunch, and you're not, this is going to be a 4th year for Jaden Ballard. If you've got first-year guys out there and it's the end of your 3rd year and you haven't really surpassed them or you're not clearly ahead of them at that point, that kind of tells me where this is probably headed. So I'm going to stick with my Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Inniss. But, I mean, sure, you're not just going to see 3 receivers this year. So if Jaden Ballard is out there to start spring ball as one of the 3, I'm not going to be shocked by any means. But, I think anything other than those 4 guys, anything outside of those 4 guys would be a little bit of a surprise to me.
How's this for you? 9 snaps in the Cotton Bowl for Brandon Inniss, 2 for Jaden Ballard, supporting your argument there. And again, that was my initial thought. All right. I just went away from my initial thought because that's usually the best practice for me, just as, everybody knows.
This is like George ordering the salmon because it swims up the stream. Yeah.
Or just doing everything the opposite. We will do like 2 deeps and things like that. And I am not looking forward to asking Brian Hartline, hey, who's at X? Who's at Z? Because I think he's going to be pretty short with that. It's like we always talk about everybody has to learn everything. I wonder if he even has that set yet. Like, does he have a 2 deep? Like we said, he can't have a 3 deep because there's only 8 guys for 3 positions. Unless, of course, you got guys covering multiple positions, which everybody can do. And that's what they're designed to do. But I'm not looking for like, hey, Brian, I know you want everybody to play everywhere. But is Emeka an X? Is he an H in the slot? Is he a Z? Like, do you label him anything? Or do you even label your receivers at this point right now? And certainly in the spring, but Marvin Harrison, is he an X? Well, he's a prototype X, but where would he was moving all over the place. So like, it's just going to be not confrontational, but you're going to have to go in understanding, like asking the question in a way like, Brian, I understand you move everybody around. And this is just for like administrative things on our end. Is he an X? Is he a Z? Like who is where? And do you think there will be a constructive conversation or a dismissive conversation?
No, this feels like this is going to be one of those like, so like who sits down and comes up with the plays? Oh, we just love to sit around and talk and draw ball plays and there's not going to be an answer, and that's okay. At this point, you sort of go in knowing that, and so it's okay. It's nothing personal. Just keep telling yourself it's nothing personal. It's just how it is. I think to me, much more useful this spring than getting a non-answer on X versus Z versus H on all these different guys is going to be who's out there first, who's out there first for practice 1, who's out there first for practice 8, who's out there first for practice 12. How does that change? And looking at how many guys get how many snaps. And, with someone like Emeka Egbuka, I kind of set him to the side because you're probably not going to get that many snaps for him. He's probably going to be in the, the 2,000 rep club? Yeah. He is probably a card carrying member of that club at this point and is probably not going to be getting as many reps because he's fine. He knows what he's doing. Don't worry. And you want to get the younger guys more reps. So you kind of put him at the top of the list, and then where are the other guys on the list behind them? And, is Carnell Tate kind of repping first? I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes. Where is Jeremiah Smith as compared to the 2nd-year receivers, the 3rd-year receivers, the 4th-year receivers? Where is Jeremiah Smith on that list? And does Jeremiah Smith start repping sooner? Does he start repping earlier as the spring kind of progresses? That feels like, maybe we'll see, but that's the kind of thing that I'm watching much more closely than trying to get an answer on something you're not going to get an answer on.
I do feel like they're moving to a positionless kind of room with the talent that they have and the things that they want to do with that offense. Who is the spring most important for? Because there's so many expectations for Jeremiah Smith as a true freshman. You've got Jaden Ballard as a 4th-year guy. You've got Keon Grays and Kojo Antwi, 2 3rd-year players who have played very little in their careers. and they're still the last two guys of their 4-man recruiting class. I think some people are surprised that they're still here, still looking obviously to fight for a spot. And Bryson Rogers coming back, this is an opportunity for him to find a role. I think a lot of guys can say that this spring is most important for me, and individually, obviously, it is for each of them. But as I look through this list, and me going with Jaden Ballard as one of the initial three, maybe, and you correctly pointing out that Brandon Inniss was playing in front of him. They play different positions, but he was getting snaps in front of him. Like, I would say maybe Jaden Ballard, because he has more of an opportunity to play, I think, than Kojo Antwi and Keon Grays. However, they are younger, so maybe if they're all on equal footing and you've got guys that are younger, maybe you go with the younger guys. I think for me, and I'm going to go with Jaden Ballard, because I still think there's a chance, not that there isn't with the other guys, but this is a big, big spring for him, because you've got a guy in Jeremiah Smith that is all world. Everybody wants to see him. It's going to be difficult to keep him off the field, I think, and especially if the gap between Jeremiah Smith as a freshman and everybody else as a fourth year or third year is not great. You better step it up this spring.
Well, I think the question is most important for in what way? Most important for in terms of this is your last chance. And it's not literally Jaden Ballard's last chance, because he does theoretically have a fifth year he could use next year. But I'm having a difficult time envisioning a receiver who doesn't play a lot the first 4 years suddenly taking on a much bigger role in year 5, when you've got still another year of Carnell Tate, still another year of Brandon Inniss, still another year of Jeremiah Smith, still another year of Mylan Graham, let alone Bryson Rogers and all the other guys we're talking about who are on the roster as well. So it feels like this is kind of, if it's going to happen for Jaden Ballard, this is the spring it would kind of have to happen. So from that perspective, it's the biggest spring for him. In terms of the biggest spring for, this is the guy who might take the biggest leap from wherever he is right now on the depth chart to where he could be potentially at the start of the season and at the end of the season, it's Jeremiah Smith. Because if Jeremiah Smith can get himself into the, I think he's going to be in the mix for, in the rotation, let's say, relatively early this year. You never want to say game 1. Garrett Wilson was not in the rotation game 1. Chris Olave was not in the rotation game 1. Marvin Harrison was not in the rotation game 1. That's not really a realistic expectation. Maybe it happens now. If it happens, it's going to start with a really big spring from him. If he's in the rotation towards the end of September or early October, that was kind of like the Garrett Wilson sort of trajectory. Chris Olave was a little bit more in the late October, early November kind of thing. Marvin Harrison really didn't come on until the Rose Bowl. But whichever it is, if he's going to, whatever his trajectory for the fall is, that starts this spring. So if you want to talk about, last chance, the answer is Jaden Ballard. If you want to talk about, highest potential raising of the ceiling, I think it's Jeremiah Smith.
Garrett Wilson did not start any games in 2019, but was one of those 5 or 6 guys, like you said. In terms of who it is most important for the team, I might go with Brandon Inniss, because you just talked about how he's going to be one of the top 3. He didn't play much last year, and that slot position is very integral in this offense. And if he is not capable of doing that, now that's going to shift a bunch of people around. So if he is capable of doing that, and he shows that this spring, because he didn't have a spring last year. This is going to be his first spring at Ohio State. So that will allow him an opportunity to grow. And if he is the number 1 guy there getting a bunch of reps with the ones, and he's going to need a bunch of reps and get a bunch of reps, there's no 2,000 rep club with him. So this could be a very big spring for him in terms of the Ohio State offense as a whole. Obviously, huge accolades, 5-star number 1 receiver in the class last year. So plenty of reason to watch him in the spring. And I'm looking forward to that. We'll see if anybody stands out like Garrett Wilson did, Jackson Smith and Jigba did. And we'll tell you immediately after practice what we saw. depending on how much we get to see. We have a couple of questions about the receivers, and the first one here is, I was listening to another podcast yesterday that indicated the wide receiver room was second to the cornerback room at Ohio State. I think it's more like fifth best until proven behind the corners, the safeties, the defensive line, the running backs. What do you think? First time, this is from at Mike782-77076. I was not aware there are other podcasts, so that is news to me. I don't think it's the number 2 room in the Woody. I think I would go ahead and agree with the corners. When you look at the safeties, it's not the deepest room, but that's kind of like Ohio State, the receivers. But you've got 2 very good ones in Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs. We're both high on Malik Hartford. It's kind of similar to the receivers, maybe, although there are 2 established players at safety. There are not 2 established players at receiver as much as we like Carnell Tate and that possibility. The defensive line, I'm not going to put the receivers ahead of the defensive line. And the running back room, there are 5 scholarship guys there. 60% of those guys we know right now could go out and rush for 1,400 yards next year for Ohio State, this year for Ohio State. So I would probably put the receivers behind the corners, behind the defensive line, and running backs, and I could tie them for 4th or 5th with the safeties. What about you?
Yeah, the running, I think they're close to the running backs. I can see the safeties. The safety room is kind of, do you want to count Jordan Hancock as a safety or as a third corner? Because they kind of talk about them interchangeably there. So depending on how you want to align him, I think that's kind of, depends on if you're putting him in the safety room, then you're probably pushing the safeties ahead of the wide receivers. The fact that this wide receiver room is as talented as it is, it's young. Outside of Emeka Ibuka, there's not necessarily a proven guy there, but you've got Carnell Tate, who we've been talking about for, a year and a half since he was in high school, as, people have been pointing at him as like, yep, this is that guy who's going to be that next dude. And you've got Brandon Ennis, who's the former 5-star, who you've, seen some flashes, and just the amount that he played last year towards the end of the year, it's instructive. So, you've got him, you've got Jeremiah Smith, who people talk about in a way that they just have not talked about other people, even in a room where there's been remarkable talent over the years. I think it's quite possible the wide receiver room finishes the year second behind the corner room. I don't think they're there yet. And, we can split hairs here in terms of safeties or running backs or wide receivers or whatever. If you're pick your choice of those 3, if one of those is your 5th most talented position group, you have a pretty good football team. I think that's, we can sit here and argue over which one is 4th versus which one is 5th. It doesn't matter. If your 5th most talented position group is as good as whichever one of those you want to say, that's probably a pretty good indication about what kind of football season you're about to have.
Yeah, and then you say, well, this group is 5th on Ohio State. Where would they rank nationally? It's like, well, also 5th. Last one with receivers, from at Michael Urbanic. Does Kojo Antwi or Jaden Ballard enter the portal after the spring game? Who knows? Don't really want to push anybody out. A lot of times we see guys that are waiting until graduation, and that happens after spring for a lot of guys. But there are going to be some decisions that have to be made. I don't know that Ohio State's going to be pushing anybody out. Like they're not looking for room. They are they need bodies. So I don't think they'll be pushing anybody out, and that's going to be up to the staff to convince guys that they need to stay or that they should stay. Not that they need to, but you should.
Well, yeah, they're not in a spot where they have to clear numbers. So you're not shoving anyone out the door to get under the 85. And you're not at a spot where you have tons and tons of guys where you just, like, this guy's never going to get any reps. This guy will never see the field. Well, the answer to will they transfer is, I don't know, ask again after the spring. We'll see how the spring goes for them, because they're still finishing winter workouts, and then they have to go through the whole spring. And we'll have a much better and much more informed answer on literally every player on the team once we get through the spring and see where where things go and how they continue to develop. Because those are guys, you didn't ask about Keon Grays. Keon Grays is another guy who's, going into his third year, missed all of last year with an injury. So we haven't seen Keon Grays since last spring. So what's Keon Grays look like right now? We don't know. Ask again in mid-April, and we'll see how it is. I think you may see, they may keep trying to work some of these guys in, even if they're not, fourth or fifth or whatever in the rotation, because you gotta see what you got, and you gotta try and, make people feel like they've got an opportunity. You want people to have an opportunity. You want people to feel like they have an opportunity, because you want to make sure you don't want to be going into the season with 6 scholarship wide receivers. That would not be a good thing. And, I don't think this is a particularly attractive landing spot for a transfer, unless you're going to land, whatever 2024's version of Jordan Addison, because there is not a vacant starting position to just walk into. And Penn State is going to be starting a wide receiver who just left Ohio State because he was not getting thrown the ball enough. So this is still a very, very tough place to kind of climb your way to the top of the hill. So I don't think it's going to be an attractive landing spot for transfer guys. So I think they're going to do what they can to try and hang on to all the guys they've got.
And I wouldn't expect any position changes. Back in the day, you just move a corner or a safety to receiver. Things are so specialized now, I would not expect any of that. So I know people are going to throw that suggestion now. Well, what about moving so-and-so? It's like, well, no, it's probably not going to happen. Let's move to tight end, where there was a position move. G. Scott from receiver to tight end many years ago. You got G. Scott Jr., you got Will Kazmarek, Bennett Christian, Jelani Thurman. I believe those are the only 4 scholarship guys right now, because the 2 freshmen won't be in until this summer. The pecking order at the outset, I'm trying to figure out, who's for, obviously G. Scott I think will be first. I'm thinking Jelani Thurman second, and then we'll need to see more from Bennett Christian to have him ahead of anybody at this point. He certainly looks the part of a Big Ten tight end. I think it'll go G. Scott, Jelani Thurman, Will Kazmarek, Bennett Christian at the outset. I think people are sleeping on Will Kazmarek as an impact player on this team, so I'm going to be very high on him until I see him running. Another guy we can throw in there is Andy Gerd, Patrick Gerd, rather. Yes, the younger Gerds.
The only good Gerd, yes.
He's a walk-on, but he played last year. So in terms of like a pecking order, I would think maybe they just come out in 12 personnel, and that way the pecking order is G. Scott and say Bennett Christian or Jelani Thurman, then Will Kazmarek and Bennett Christian. And I don't know, where are you on that with those 4? Like what order are they going to be warming up in, Tom? Because we know that's the most important thing. That's our first look.
It's the most important thing because it's the thing that we can see during the portion of practice that we get to watch. So therefore it makes it the most important information there is. I think when you have a guy who's come in as a transfer and you've got 3 other guys who've been around the program for 1 to 3 years, or 4 years? 4 years for G. Scott, I think. You have to assume that the new guy is going to be towards the back of the line at the start, just as he's sort of learning how things go. I am expecting Will Kazmarek, even if he's 3rd or 4th in the pecking order at the start, to be probably one of the top 2 in terms of snaps for tight ends this year because of the role he's going to play and the reason he was brought in. I think you might see a good bit of him being that blocking tight end for Ohio State. And he can catch the ball too. He is not just an anvil. He had 20 something catches in both of his 2 seasons at Ohio University. So he's going to have a role, but I think you just sort of have to assume new guy coming in is going to be sort of towards the back of the line as they sort of, as he sort of gets up to speed. I'm much more interested in where he is practice 15 than I am in where he is practice 1, because I think practice 1 is going to be sort of unless he's last, I'll put it this way, if he's not last, I think that will tell me a lot more than him being last in the first day of practice, because that's sort of my default answer for new guys is, you're going to be at the back of the line. And then the really interesting thing is to watch you try and work your way up that depth chart throughout the spring.
Yeah, and let's just go right into this, because this is a question from @TD&J and TD&G about Will Kazmarek. The recent additions to the offense, i.e. Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard, Seth McLaughlin, Chip Kelly make it appear that the offense will be run-centric in 2024. Is it safe to say, since Will Kazmarek was brought here for his blocking and G. Scott and Jelani Thurman are more receiving tight ends, that he will be the starter? I think this is where I think people are underselling Will Kazmarek as a pass catcher. Obviously, the dude is like 6'6", 255 or whatever, and can get bigger. But that's also about the same size as Jelani Thurman. And so one for one guy to be the receiver, one guy to be the blocker. But I agree with you, Tom. Part of the reason why I think he's going to be so involved in 12 personnel, and not just 12 personnel, I think he will be at times be the lone tight end. But this Chip Kelly running game that they're going to be working on, and when you have Travion Henderson, you've got Quinshon Judkins, you've got Will Howard, that's going to be an outlet that is going to be as run-centric, I think, as the 2019 team, where they rushed for like 260 yards a game, or maybe the 2020 team did, but well over like 250 yards a game, which is not something we have seen from Ohio State since then. But we also haven't seen a quarterback like this that just threatens. And really, it's the threat as much as the actual act that will help them, I think. But I am not going to be shocked if Will Kazmarek starts 15 games, 16 games, or like 6, just depending on the package that they're going to be working with. I'm fascinated to see what happens with G. Scott this year. This is his 5th year. So let's see what that looks like. This is basically what everything has been building towards. This is what the position move was made for, is this final version of himself before he heads off to the NFL. So I don't think he's going to give up that spot lightly at all.
No, I think he's at the point where, he is no longer the wide receiver who's been in the tight end room, and he's still learning how to play the position. He's been in the tight end room now. This is his 3rd season as a tight end, right? And he played 2 seasons at wide receiver. So, he's certainly at the point where in his career, he is the veteran leader. He's gone from the young guy to the new guy in the tight end room, and now Cade Stover's gone. So he is the veteran in there. So yeah, I think if I'm going to bet on who's going to have the most snaps at tight end, it's probably G. Scott. But I think Will Kazmarek is up there as well. Jelani Thurman is probably still a year away from being like the main tight end. I think you're going to see some Jelani Thurman packages. I think you're going to see some stuff drawn up for him because he is such an incredible athlete. And you got some glimpses of it last year in the closing minutes of some of those late season games where it was just, okay, they Lincoln Keenholz completed like 3 passes, I think, and 2 of them were to Jelani Thurman in the end of the Michigan State or Minnesota game. I think it was the Michigan State game, and I think he might have been throwing one in the end zone for Jelani Thurman as well. He just feels like it's coming there. It might just not quite be there yet, because I think Will Kazmarek is going to I think he's going to have a bigger role than a lot of people probably think, just because of what he does and what they're looking for out of that tight end position. Ryan Day's talked about it. Why do you always play a tight end? Well, we feel it's important for the run game. Well, there you go. It's important for the run game. It's important because it's, it gives you an extra edge blocker, all that kind of stuff. That just, all that sort of makes me think this is probably going to be a pretty busy season for Will Kazmarek.
Yeah, it leads us to the next question. I'd really like to see Chip Kelly utilize our tight ends like Georgia used Brock Bowers. Could you see this happening? This is from @Chris_Estes1. And so I went through and I looked at the average tight end, the TE1, the average starting tight end under Chip Kelly as a head coach. And there are some significant numbers here. The Brock Bowers thing, Tom, you probably did not see this. Brock Bowers pictured next to Rob Gronkowski at some show or something a few days ago. Rob Gronkowski makes Brock Bowers just look like a normal person, which kind of worries me about his NFL future. I mean, Bowers is listed at 6'4", 240, but he certainly doesn't look like it next to an former NFL tight end. But depending on the talent at tight end, Chip Kelly will use that guy. And you can go back to his first year at UCLA with Caleb Wilson. Caleb Wilson, tight end, 60 catches, 965 yards. That's right up the Brock Bowers tree. However, you look at this past year, and the number 1 tight end had 14 catches for 283 yards. Now, I like the 20-yard average, I'm not going to expect that from an Ohio State tight end this year. But there are some numbers. In 2019, Devin Asiasi, 44 catches, 641 yards. There are, 4 seasons here of 40 receptions or more, and that's right about what Cade Stover had. I would say if you can have a tight end that does what Cade Stover did last year, take that. I would be surprised by that. But again, let's see what G. Scott can do. Maybe he's going to be the surprise of this whole thing. But I don't know that one guy is so far ahead of the other that you're going to have one guy get the majority of the catches.
No, I don't think so. I think you've got a couple, you've got G. Scott, you've got Jelani Thurman, you've got Will Kesmerick, who has, again, caught like 20 passes a year at Ohio University. So even if he just has 10 this year, there are only so many footballs to go around. We just talked about how run heavy they're likely going to be. Well, guess what? Every play you run, you're not throwing to the tight end. And you've got all these really talented wide receivers that we talked about earlier in the show. Every time you throw the ball to Emeka Egbuka, every time you throw the ball to Cardinal Tate, every time you throw the ball to Brandon Inniss, every time you throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith, you are not throwing the ball to the tight end. And I don't know that, the tight end position production dropped off for Chip Kelly quite a bit the last couple of years. Kind of had some crappy quarterback play last year. That's probably part of the reason why. But if you have wide receivers like Ohio State has, and you have running backs like Ohio State has, the tight end is a, 2 catches a game, kind of 3 catches a game kind of thing. I think I'm thinking like the Cade Stover season is kind of the ceiling for what the Ohio State tight end is probably going to be, especially under this kind of roster where if you throw the ball to the tight end 5 times on a drive, people are going to be screaming about why aren't you handing the ball to your two talented to your talented running backs. You're throwing the ball to your wide receivers. You have Emeka Egbuka, you have Cardinal Tate. Why do you keep throwing the ball to one of your tight ends? It's like a seasoning. You season. Add a pinch of tight end here or there. That's what they're going to have a big role in the team. It's not necessarily going to show up as 9 catches a week or anything like that. You're not going to see Brock Bowers numbers for Ohio State tight ends because Ohio State wide receivers are significantly better than Georgia wide receivers have been the last couple of years.
Boom, roasted. Cade Stover, 41 catches, 576 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. I think that's a high watermark for what we will see, but I am willing to be proven wrong, which rarely happens on this show, but there's a first time for everything. That's going to do it. I'm not even going to ask Tom if he has anything left to say because I know exactly what it would be if I did. So, of course, you can always find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Please become a member if you have not yet done so. It's a great way to support what we do. Stuff like Tom's Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, every day, the podcast there, Kevin's Big Me Kickoff, Mark Givler's Skull Session Recruiting Podcast. They just dropped one today. Mark and Kevin are going to be traveling down to Atlanta, then over to Indianapolis, and then back home for some combines and some camps. So tons of recruiting information. Mark has had a bunch of stuff from recruits about the new coaching changes, linebacker thoughts on James Laurinaitis, quarterback thoughts from Jared Curtis and guys like that. Very top targets. Will Griffin about Chip Kelly. Everything seems to be going well in the assistant coaching thought processes of these kids, these recruits. So check that out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Go ahead and like this video if you have not. If you're watching on YouTube, please do so. And of course, 5-star rating and review anywhere your podcasts are sold. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.